Hi everyone, welcome to 5 Quote Shakespeare, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone clips. If you like what you see, don't forget to like and subscribe, and be sure to visit my YouTube channel for a chapter-by-chapter analysis of the most important themes in the story. See the description for details. Thanks for watching. Chapter 2, of course, is all about the struggling of Harry's psyche to make itself felt, his will to make itself felt in the world, and it's glorious. There are 4 times where Harry's magic powers, and again, magic powers are only a metaphor for an individual's personality, their own self that's trying to emerge. And a child is not fully formed; it's trying to emerge. So 4 times in Chapter 2, Harry's magic powers emerge unbidden, as impulses rather than consciously controlled actions. Now, that we know that, we watch it and we enjoy that, and we sense something's going on there, some kind of significance. Well, you can figure out what the significance is. If you look at Freud, if you look at your psychology, you recognize this instantly. It maps beautifully onto Freud's notion of the id, the ego, and the superego. So these eruptions, they're impulsive eruptions, are the result of dangerous frustrations felt by all children. Children are controlled by their id. Their id is that irrational center of primitive impulses. I want. That's Dudley. So Dudley's all id. It's uncontrolled. Now, Freud identified the superego as the demands of society. Yeah, fine, you can have your urges. We all have urges, primitive urges, but you've got to fit those into the way society works in a way that's productive, do you see? And the way we do that, Freud said, is we use our ego, this part of our psyche. There's 3 parts of our psyche, according to Freud. We use our ego, which is the rational negotiator, to wisely look at the requirements of society and say, okay, well, here's what I need, and here's how society is mapped out. So if I want to satisfy my needs in a way that will make my life better instead of worse, this is what I got to do. So the ego is the rational negotiator. So Dudley has none of this, and Harry is learning it now. And this is where we see his id making itself felt. These eruptions are the result of dangerous frustrations of the id making itself felt. But especially by those, they're felt by all children, but especially by children with inadequate parents. So the Dudley parent, they've got these frustrations, and they're selfish, and they're just making themselves felt, as I said, and they're not being trained the way they should be trained. These feelings must be confronted, understood, and resolved. So the job of a good parent is to say, okay, honey, you've got these feelings. All right, fine. So this is what your feelings are. Well, here's how you can get what you need in a way that makes everybody happy and makes life better. That's what a mature, responsible adult is supposed to do for the kids. But neglectful parents or overly permissive parents don't do an adequate job of that. So in the fairy tale context, in the mythic fairy tale storytelling context, fairy tales caution against the destructive consequences if one fails to develop higher levels of responsible selfhood. That's what the ego is supposed to be doing, teaching you how to become a responsible adult. Take these primitive 2-year-old tantrum fits and figure out what you're supposed to do with those things, because we do have impulses that need to be addressed and satisfied, but in a mature way. To the child, these fairy tales subtly, very, very subtly, suggest why we ought to strive for higher integration of these urges and what's involved in it. We watch Dudley and we say, I'm not going to be that guy. That's what Beetleheim also suggested. I quote somewhere, he said, fairy tales don't wag a finger at us and tell us what we should do. They show us who we should be. I want to be Harry and not Dudley. I see what Dudley's doing and there's something wrong with it. So I'm going to be like Harry, which means I'm going to gradually integrate my id into a more sophisticated, mature person. So to the child, these tales subtly suggest why he ought to strive for higher integration and what's involved in it. These same stories also intimate to a parent that he ought to be aware of the risks involved in his child's development. Oh my goodness, parents who read Harry Potter to their kids or read Harry Potter themselves or read it when they were younger, remember the lessons of Dudley when you're raising your own kids. That's what fairy tales are supposed to do. Yeah, they educate the parents at the same time they educate the young people. Isn't that glorious? And Rowling nailed it. She nailed it in these early stories. In all of the series, there's so much going on in all 7 books. So here are these instances. You remember them. The next morning, however, so he has a bad haircut. He hates his haircut that Petunia gives him, and it magically grows back. So next morning, however, he had got up to find his hair exactly as it had been before, and Petunia had sheared it off. He couldn't explain how it had grown back. The id took over. There was an impulsive manifestation of his will in the world. Okay, the id made itself manifest by this impulsive eruption. Another one, the harder she tried to pull the crappy old jumper, the sweater over Harry's head, the smaller it seemed to become. So his id took over, his will in the world took over. Perhaps adequately, perhaps this was a good way to go. But if he keeps doing this throughout life, he's going to be he's going to be a monster in society with those magic powers. Some superhero stories talk about that. The young child who hasn't integrated their powers properly, and there's that's part of the metaphor. So the jumper became smaller and smaller until it might have fitted a glove puppet. So there's an eruption of his id as well. Again, Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual. When much to Harry's surprise, as anyone else's, he was sitting on a chimney. So he magically made himself jump up onto the top of a chimney, which is bad news, because he's supposed to learn how to control his powers, because the Ministry of Magic is going to get him and the Muggles are going to find out what's going on. So it's poorly integrated, inchoate expressions of self. Inchoate is a cool word. It means it's unformed. It's there, but it's unformed and uncontrolled, not understood. So we get the magic number 3, and that sets up the final one with the snake when he removes the glass. Really, really cool stuff. I guess we talked about all of this. Let me just read through these. So Harry's powers have been neglected. They haven't been overindulged. His id hasn't been overindulged. It's actually been neglected, and you can't neglect your id either, because you do have these needs. They have not yet been tamed, harnessed, so that they can be put to appropriate and more effective use. That's what you want to do. That's what you want to do. If you're a teenager listening to this, you take that energy, you take that teen energy, that perhaps impulsiveness, and you train it, and you become a beast in the world, and you really make yourself a better person, and thereby making the world a better place to live in. Go back and watch video 1, I talk about that. They are still very much part of his wild, undisciplined id. That's part of the process of growing up. You have to discipline your id, discipline it, make it. It's a team of wild horses. Harness it and go, go, go. So Hogwarts, this is what school is supposed to do. Good schools. A lot of teachers are idiots, and a lot of teachers are like Dudley's parents, and they're overly permissive, and they're not teaching young people, how to take what they've got in them and to really make themselves useful in the world and to themselves. So Hogwarts society, together with the mentors and the helpers, which are supposed to be our teachers in the real world, and Harry Potter's very, very fortunate. We see these ideal mentors like Sirius Black and Dumbledore and Mrs. Weasley. We see these great mentors and helpers in the world, and they're supposed to help us train our egos to navigate between the id's primitive destructive pleasure-seeking and the superego's recognition of and adaptation to the social norms and mores. It's destructive. Left on its own, the id is destructive. Those impulses will destroy you. And so you get pleasure-seeking, 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 pleasure-seeking until you're 40 years old and you've done nothing but seek pleasure, and you're absolutely useless to society and yourself, and you're depressed. So sad. Listen to the lessons of the fairy tales, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so speaking of which, let's talk about the hero's shadow, the integrated beast.